It was one of those late August afternoons when the air feels thick enough to chew, sticky, heavy, and slow. The kind of heat that makes even the pigeons on the sidewalk look tired. A man was driving home from work, windows down, radio low, just trying to get through the last stretch of his day. He'd spent the morning grading essays, the afternoon breaking up a hallway argument between two sophomores, and now all he wanted was a cold glass of water and maybe 10 quiet minutes before dinner. He wasn't speeding. He wasn't swerving. His car, a 10-year-old sedan with a dent on the passenger side from a parking lot scrape, wasn't flashy, loud, or suspicious in any way. But that didn't matter. A police cruiser pulled up behind him, lights flashing. Not the urgent spinning kind, just the steady, slow blink that says, "Pull over." He checked his rearview mirror, sighed softly, and eased onto the shoulder. He turned off the engine, rolled up his windows just enough to keep the bugs out, and placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could be seen. He'd done this before, not because he'd done anything wrong, but because he'd been taught from a young age that this was how you stayed safe during a traffic stop. Hands visible. Voice calm. No sudden moves. The officer approached slowly, one hand resting near his belt, the other holding a small notepad. He was in his late 40s, broad-shouldered, with a thick mustache and eyes that didn't quite meet the driver's. He leaned down slightly, peering into the car. "License and registration," he said, voice flat. The man reached carefully for his glove compartment, moving slowly, announcing each motion like a pilot going through a checklist. "Just getting my registration, officer." "Keep your hands where I can see 'em," the officer snapped, stepping back half a step, hand now resting fully on his holster. The man froze. "I'm sorry, I was just—" "Don't move," the officer cut in, his tone sharpening like a blade being drawn. "You think I don't know what you're doing? You think I haven't seen your kind before?" The words landed like stones. The man didn't respond. He knew better than to argue. He'd heard that phrase, "your kind," too many times to count in too many different voices. He kept his eyes forward, breathing steady, heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. The officer circled the car, shining a flashlight through each window, even though it was still daylight. He yanked open the driver's door without warning. "Step out now. Am I under arrest?" the man asked quietly. "Don't ask questions," the officer barked. "Just get out." He stepped out, hands still raised slightly. The officer immediately spun him around, shoved him face first against the hot metal of the car roof, and cuffed his wrists behind his back. Tight, too tight, cutting into his skin. Bystanders had started to gather on the sidewalk, phones out, but no one said a word. They just watched. "You've been acting real nervous," the officer muttered, patting him down with rough, impatient hands. "Smell like trouble?" "I haven't done anything," the man said, voice strained against the pressure on his back. "Yeah, sure," the officer scoffed. "That's what they all say." He walked back to the car, opened the glove compartment, and rummaged through it. Papers fluttered to the ground. A water bottle rolled under the seat. Then, with a quick, practiced motion, the officer pulled out a small plastic bag, something that hadn't been there before, and held it up like a trophy. "Found it," he announced, loud enough for the onlookers to hear. "Right where I knew it'd be." The man's stomach dropped. He knew what that meant. He'd seen it happen to others. He'd read the stories, but he never thought it would happen to him. Not like this, not in broad daylight, not when he'd done everything right. He was shoved into the back of the patrol car without another word. The door slammed shut, sealing him in that hot, plastic-smelling space. Through the window, he saw the officer speaking to a couple of bystanders, shaking his head like he was the one who'd been wronged. One woman tried to say something, but the officer cut her off with a sharp wave of his hand. At the station, things moved fast and yet impossibly slow. He was fingerprinted, photographed, and placed in a holding cell with 3 other men who looked just as confused and exhausted as he felt. No one explained why he was there beyond possession. No one read him his rights clearly. When he asked for a phone call, the desk sergeant just laughed and said, "You'll get your turn." He sat on the thin metal bench back against the wall, staring at the floor. His mind raced. His students would wonder where he was tomorrow. His landlord might think he'd skipped out. His mother would worry sick if she heard about this on the local news. And worst of all, he hadn't done anything. Not one single thing. Meanwhile, across town, his older brother was finishing up a long day at his law office. He'd been working on a case involving wrongful termination, but his mind kept drifting. He'd texted his brother earlier that afternoon, "How was your day?" and hadn't gotten a reply. That wasn't unusual. His brother often forgot to check his phone after school, but something felt off. Then his phone buzzed. A local news alert. Man arrested during traffic stop on Elm Street. The photo was grainy, but he recognized the car instantly. His stomach twisted. He called the station. No answer. He called his brother's phone straight to voicemail. He tried the school. The secretary said he'd left at the usual time. Panic set in, quiet and cold. He grabbed his keys and drove straight to the precinct. When he arrived, he identified himself as an attorney and demanded to see his brother. It took nearly an hour of arguing with a disinterested desk officer, but finally they led him into the back. He found his brother sitting alone in a small interview room, wrists still cuffed, eyes red but dry. "What happened?" he asked, voice low. His brother told him everything. The stop, the shove, the planted bag, the silence of the crowd. He spoke calmly, but his hands trembled slightly when he described the moment the officer pulled out that little plastic bag like it had always been there. His brother listened without interrupting. He'd heard versions of this story before, in depositions, in courtrooms, in late-night calls from clients who'd been through the same thing. But this was different. This was family. This was someone who'd spent his life trying to do good, to build something quiet and honest in a world that often rewarded the opposite. "Okay," he said, finally standing up. "We're getting you out tonight." He filed the paperwork, posted bail, and within 2 hours they were walking out of the station into the cool night air. His brother didn't say much on the drive home. He just stared out the window, watching the streetlights blur past. Back at his apartment, over a cup of tea that did little to warm him, he finally spoke. "Why me? I followed every rule. I did everything they tell us to do." His brother didn't answer right away. He knew there was no real answer, not one that made sense anyway. The truth was ugly and simple. Sometimes doing everything right isn't enough. Sometimes just being who you are is enough to make you a target. But he didn't say that. Instead, he said, "This isn't over." His brother looked up, eyes tired but sharp. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said, setting his cup down, "that officer thinks his badge makes him untouchable. He's done this before. He'll do it again unless someone stops him." He pulled out his laptop, opened a new document, and began typing. He requested the body cam footage. He filed a public records request for the officer's personnel file. He called a few trusted contacts, a journalist, a civil rights organizer, a former colleague at the district attorney's office. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Cops protect their own. Systems protect themselves. But he also knew something the officer didn't. This time, he'd picked the wrong person to mess with. Not because his brother was powerful or famous, but because he had someone in his corner who understood the system well enough to break it open. As the night wore on, the older brother stayed up, digging through old case files, making notes, mapping out a strategy. Outside, the city slept. But inside that small apartment, something was waking up. Something quiet, determined and unshakable. The officer, meanwhile, was probably at home, feet up, watching TV, confident that another problem had been handled. He didn't know that the man he'd humiliated that afternoon had a brother who'd spent years learning how to fight back. Not with fists, but with facts, with law, with truth. And that truth, once uncovered, wouldn't stay buried. The next morning, the teacher called in sick for the first time in 7 years. His students would be confused. His principal would be concerned. But he needed a day to breathe, to think, to remember that he hadn't done anything wrong. His brother, on the other hand, went straight to his office. He printed out every complaint ever filed against that officer, 8 in total, stretching back over a decade. Most had been dismissed due to insufficient evidence. But the patterns were clear. The same language, the same tactics, the same victims, young men, mostly black, mostly driving older cars, mostly just trying to get home. He also found something else, a sealed internal affairs report from 2 years ago. It mentioned discrepancies in evidence handling and credibility concerns. It had never gone public, but it existed. He smiled for the first time in days. This wasn't just about one bad stop. This was about a pattern, and patterns could be proven. He picked up the phone and called a federal civil rights attorney he'd worked with years ago. "I've got something you need to see," he said. By noon, they were meeting in a quiet cafe downtown, laptops open, documents spread across the table. The attorney skimmed the files, eyebrows rising with each page. "This is solid," he said finally. "If we can get that body cam footage, we've got a case." But getting the footage wouldn't be easy. The department had already claimed it was under review. Translation, they were stalling. Maybe even editing. Still, the older brother wasn't worried. He'd been through this dance before. He knew how to apply pressure. Through the courts, through the press, through public records laws. And he knew one thing for certain. The officer had made a critical mistake. He'd assumed the man he stopped was alone. But he wasn't. He had a brother who knew the law, and that brother wasn't going to let this go. As the days passed, word began to spread. A local activist group shared the teacher's story online. A few news outlets picked it up, though most were cautious, waiting for official confirmation. But the seed was planted. People were talking. The officer, sensing the shift, doubled down. In a brief statement to a local reporter, he called the allegations baseless and insisted he'd followed protocol. He even hinted that the driver had been combative, a claim contradicted by the few bystander videos that had surfaced, but those videos were grainy, shaky, incomplete. They showed the shove, the cuffs, the officer reaching into the glove box, but not the exact moment the bag appeared. Without the official body cam footage, it was his word against theirs. And in the past, that had always been enough, but this time, something felt different. Maybe it was the way the teacher spoke, calm, clear, consistent. Maybe it was the fact that he was a respected educator, not someone with a record. Or maybe it was just that people were finally tired of hearing the same story over and over again. Whatever it was, the pressure was building, and the officer, for the first time in his career, started to feel uneasy. He checked his phone more often. He avoided eye contact with his fellow officers at roll call. He even called his union rep twice in 1 week. Because deep down, he knew he'd crossed a line, and this time, the man on the other side of that line wasn't going to disappear quietly. He had a brother, and that brother was coming for him. The older brother didn't sleep much that week. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the image of his sibling pressed against the hot roof of his car, hands cuffed behind his back, voice steady even as his whole world tilted sideways. It wasn't just anger that kept him up. It was the quiet, grinding weight of knowing how easily this could have ended worse. A wrong move, a misunderstood gesture, a moment of frustration. Any of those could have turned a traffic stop into a tragedy. And that knowledge sat in his chest like a stone. He'd spent years working inside the system, first as a public defender, then as a prosecutor, and now as a civil rights attorney who took on cases others called unwinnable. He knew how the gears turned, how favors were traded, how complaints vanished into filing cabinets labeled closed, no finding. But this wasn't just another case. This was personal, and that changed everything. He started with the basics. He filed a formal request for the body cam footage under the state's open records law. The police department responded within 48 hours, but not with the video. Instead, they sent a letter saying the footage was part of an active internal investigation and therefore exempt from disclosure. Classic delay tactic. He'd seen it 100 times. But he also knew the clock was ticking. Footage could disappear. Metadata could be altered. Memory cards could fail, so he didn't wait. He reached out to a journalist he trusted, a woman who'd spent 15 years covering City Hall and police corruption without ever losing her edge or her integrity. They met at a diner on the edge of town, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like burnt toast. He slid a folder across the table. "This is everything I have so far," he said. 8 prior complaints against the same officer, all involving traffic stops, all involving black men, all dismissed with the same vague language. No corroborating evidence. But look at the dates. Look at the locations. It's a pattern. She flipped through the pages slowly, her expression unreadable. Then she looked up. "You think he planted evidence?" "I know he did," he said. "My brother's car hadn't been searched in over a year. He doesn't even smoke. And that bag?" It was sealed. Brand new. Like it came from a kit. She nodded, scribbling notes. I'll start digging, but you know they'll circle the wagons. I'm counting on it, he said, because when they do, they'll slip up. While she worked her contacts in the department and the union, he turned his attention to the legal side. He pulled every court filing, every internal memo, every training document he could find related to this officer. And buried in a stack of old disciplinary records obtained through a Freedom of Information request he'd filed years ago for a different case, he found something that made his pulse quicken. 2 years earlier, the same officer had been investigated after a young man claimed he'd been falsely arrested for resisting during a routine ID check. The Internal Affairs report noted that the officer's body cam had malfunctioned during the critical minutes of the encounter. More suspiciously, the backup dashcam footage from the patrol car showed the officer reaching into his own pocket just before claiming he'd found a knife in the man's waistband. The case was dropped when the young man, afraid of retaliation, refused to testify. But the report was still there, in the city's own files. Marked confidential but not destroyed. That was the break he needed. He called a former colleague who now worked in the state attorney general's civil rights division. They'd gone to law school together, argued moot court cases until 2 a.m., and once shared a six-pack after losing a tough trial. He trusted him. "I've got a situation," he said, "and I think it's federal." He laid it all out. The stop, the planted evidence, the history, the pattern. His friend listened in silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was serious. "If you can prove he acted under color of law to deprive someone of their constitutional rights, that's a Section 1983 violation, maybe even criminal civil rights charges. I just need the footage," he said. "Without it, it's his word against my brother's." "Then get it," his friend said. "File a motion to preserve. File for expedited discovery. And if they stall, go public. The court hates when departments hide evidence." That afternoon, he did exactly that. He drafted a legal motion demanding the immediate preservation and release of all video, audio, and digital records related to the stop. He cited precedent, cited statutes, cited the officer's own troubling history. Then he filed it in federal court. Within hours, the police union's lawyer sent a furious email, calling the motion reckless and defamatory. The department issued a statement, saying they fully cooperated with all lawful inquiries. But behind the scenes, things were shifting. He could feel it. A few days later, a rookie officer, someone he'd never met, called him from a blocked number. The voice was young, nervous, barely above a whisper. "I saw what happened," the caller said. "I was on bike patrol 2 blocks away. I watched the whole thing." The older brother sat very still. "Go on. The officer." He didn't find anything at first. He was mad. Then he walked back to his cruiser, opened the center console, and came back with that little bag. "I swear on my life. Do you have any proof?" he asked gently. "No, but I'll testify. I can't sleep knowing what I saw." They arranged to meet in person at a public library, neutral ground. The young officer arrived in plain clothes, eyes darting, shoulders tense. He was barely 25, with a fresh haircut and hands that wouldn't stop fidgeting. Over weak coffee from the library cafe, he told his story again, slowly, carefully. "He's been like this since I got here," the rookie said. "Always picking on people for no reason. Always saying stuff like, 'You know how they are.' I thought maybe I was imagining it. But after what I saw, I can't unsee it." The older brother didn't push. He didn't ask for a signed statement right away. He just listened. And when the young man finally looked up, eyes wet but determined, he said, "Thank you. That took courage." "I'm not brave," the officer said. "I'm just tired of pretending." That night, the older brother updated his legal strategy. He now had a witness, someone inside the department, someone with nothing to gain and everything to lose. That changed the game, but he also knew the risks. If the rookie's identity got out, his career would be over. Maybe worse. So he filed a motion to keep the witness's name sealed, citing credible threat of retaliation. The judge granted it the next day. Meanwhile, the journalist published her first piece. Not an accusation, just a question. Why has Officer Derek Mallory faced 8 internal complaints in 10 years and never been disciplined? She included redacted excerpts from the files, quotes from anonymous former colleagues, and a timeline of incidents. It wasn't explosive, but it was enough to make people pay attention. Online, the story started to spread. Local activists shared it. Community leaders called for a review. Even the city councilwoman who usually avoided police issues posted, "We deserve transparency." The department responded with a press release calling the article misleading and based on incomplete records. But the damage was done. Public trust, already fragile, began to crack. Back at home, the teacher was trying to return to normal. He went back to school, greeted his students with the same calm smile, graded papers late into the night. But something had shifted. He jumped when a car slowed near his house. He double-checked his mirrors more often, and he never drove without his phone recording. His brother noticed. "You don't have to go through this alone," he said one evening over dinner. "I know," the teacher replied, "but I also can't let fear run my life." "That's not fear," his brother said gently. "That's survival." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of that truth hanging between them. A week later, the judge ordered the police department to release the body cam footage within 48 hours. No excuses, no delays. The order was sharp, direct, and left no room for interpretation. The department complied, but not without a fight. Their lawyer filed an emergency appeal, claiming privacy concerns and ongoing investigation. It was denied. The night before the footage was due, the older brother couldn't sleep. He paced his apartment, rehearsing arguments, anticipating counterclaims, preparing for every possible twist. He knew the department might release a heavily edited version. He'd seen it before, convenient gaps, missing audio, blurred faces. But when the file finally arrived via secure email at 9 a.m., it was complete, raw, unedited. He watched it alone. In his office, volume low. There it was, the stop, the calm compliance, the sudden aggression, the shove the cuffs. Then the officer walking back to his cruiser, opening the center console, pulling out a small bag, returning to the car, and discovering it in the glove compartment. The whole thing took less than 90 seconds. His hands shook as he hit pause, not from shock, he'd expected it, but from the sheer brazen arrogance of it. The officer hadn't even tried to be subtle. He'd done it in broad daylight, in front of witnesses like he knew no one would believe them anyway. That was the real crime, he realized. Not just the planting of evidence, but the certainty that he could get away with it. That his badge was a shield, not a responsibility. He immediately sent a copy to the journalist, the federal attorney, and his legal team. Within hours, the journalist published a follow-up. Body cam footage appears to show evidence being planted during traffic stop. She included a carefully edited clip, just enough to show the sequence, not enough to violate privacy laws. The internet exploded. News stations picked it up. National outlets called for comment. Protesters gathered outside the police station, not with anger, but with signs that read accountability and protect. And serve all of us. The department went silent. The union issued a statement saying the footage was being reviewed and that the officer deserved due process. But the tide had turned. The older brother knew this was only the beginning. The real battle would be in court, where facts mattered, but so did perception, procedure, and power. He began preparing for trial, knowing the officer's lawyers would attack his brother's character, question his motives, and try to paint the whole thing as a misunderstanding. But he also knew something they didn't. This wasn't just about one bad cop. It was about proving that no one, not even someone with a badge and a gun and years of unchecked authority, was above the law, and he had everything he needed to prove. The rookie officer called again that night. "They're talking about me at the station," he said, voice tight. "Not by name, but they know someone talked. Stay safe," the older brother said. "And remember, you're doing the right thing." "I just hope it's enough," the young man whispered. "It will be," he replied, "because now the truth has a witness, and a video, and a voice." He hung up and looked out the window at the city lights. Somewhere out there, his brother was probably grading papers, trying to hold on to normalcy. Somewhere else, the officer was likely scrambling, calling favors, preparing his defense. And in between them stood the law, not perfect, not always fair, but still the best tool they had. The older brother took a deep breath, opened his laptop, and began drafting his opening statement for trial. He wasn't just fighting for his brother anymore. He was fighting for every person who'd been told to stay quiet, to let it go, to be grateful it wasn't worse. This time, they wouldn't stay quiet. This time, they'd be heard. The moment the body cam footage went public, Everything changed, and yet nothing moved faster than the system wanted it to. The video spread like wildfire online, shared by activists, news outlets, even ordinary people who just couldn't believe what they'd seen. But inside the courthouse, in the back offices of the police department, and in the quiet hallways of City Hall, the real battle began. And it wasn't fought with cameras or hashtags. It was fought with paperwork, delays, and old boy networks that had spent decades protecting their own. The older brother knew this was coming. He'd seen it before, cases that looked open and shut on the surface only to vanish into a maze of legal technicalities, jurisdictional disputes, and procedural errors. So he braced himself. But even he wasn't ready for how hard they'd push back. First came the motion to dismiss. The officers' union lawyer, a slick, silver-haired man who'd defended cops for 30 years, filed a 28-page brief claiming the lawsuit was frivolous, politically motivated, and based on cherry-picked evidence. He argued that the body cam footage didn't prove intent, that the bag could have been there all along, and that the teacher had failed to cooperate during the stop. It was a classic playbook: muddy the waters, attack the victim, and hope the public forgets before trial. The older brother responded calmly, point by point citing case law, department policy, and the rookie officer's sworn affidavit filed under seal. But the judge, a no-nonsense veteran of the bench, didn't rule right away. He wanted full briefing, translation, more delays. Then came the whispers. A neighbor of the teacher mentioned that someone had been asking questions around his apartment building. Just curious, they said, but the questions were too specific. A school administrator gently suggested he take a leave of absence for his own well-being. Even his students started acting differently, some avoiding eye contact, others whispering in the halls. It wasn't overt hostility, but it was enough to make him feel watched, exposed, like he'd become a symbol instead of a person. His brother noticed the change. "They're trying to wear you down," he said one evening over takeout. "Don't let them." "I'm not scared," the teacher replied, pushing rice around his plate. "I'm just tired of being treated like I did something wrong." "You didn't," his brother said firmly, "and we're going to prove it." But proving it meant fighting on multiple fronts. While the legal battle dragged on, the older brother also had to protect his brother's reputation. He reached out to the school board, provided them with the full footage, and made it clear that any retaliation would become part of the federal lawsuit. That got their attention. Within days, the principal sent a supportive email and publicly praised the teacher's dedication and integrity. Still, the pressure mounted. The police union launched its own media campaign. They released a heavily edited highlight reel of the officer's career, handing out toys at Christmas, helping an elderly woman cross the street, receiving a community service award from a local business group. They didn't mention the complaints. They didn't mention the pattern. They just painted him as a hero who'd been misunderstood. The local newspaper ran a balanced op-ed titled "Two Sides to Every Story," quoting anonymous officers who called the accused cop a stand-up guy and questioned why the teacher didn't just comply. The piece didn't include a single quote from the teacher or his brother. It didn't need to. The message was clear. Doubt had been sown. For a few days, the momentum stalled. Online comments turned ugly. Some people said the teacher should have known better than to drive that car in that neighborhood. Others claimed the whole thing was a setup by anti-police activists. The older brother read every comment, not because he wanted to, but because he needed to understand the battlefield. He knew facts alone wouldn't win this. He needed to humanize his brother, not as a victim, but as a person. So he gave a quiet interview to a small podcast that focused on education and community. No dramatic music, no flashy edits. Just two men talking. "He's a teacher," he said simply. "He spends his days helping kids believe in themselves. He's the kind of person who stays late to tutor a struggling student, who buys school supplies out of his own pocket, who shows up, even when it's hard." That's who they targeted. Not a criminal. Not a threat. Just a man going home from work. The episode didn't go viral, but it resonated. Teachers shared it. Parents listened. A few local businesses posted signs in their windows. "We stand with our educators." Then, the breakthrough came from an unexpected place. The journalist who'd broken the story received a tip from someone inside the police department's records division. Buried in an old digital archive, marked for deletion during a system cleanup, was a training evaluation from 5 years earlier. In it, the officer had failed a section on bias awareness and evidence handling. His supervisor had written, "Officer demonstrates concerning attitude toward minority drivers. Recommends retraining." The document had never been included in his personnel file. It had been hidden. The journalist verified it with 2 separate sources before publishing. This time, the story wasn't just about one incident. It was about a culture that allowed misconduct to fester, then covered it up. Public outrage reignited. City council members who'd stayed silent now demanded an independent review. The mayor, facing re-election, announced a full audit of the police department's internal affairs process. Even the police chief, a man known for his loyalty to the rank and file, issued a rare statement saying, "If these allegations are true, they represent a betrayal of the badge." But the real turning point came when the rookie officer made his move. He walked into internal affairs, not with a lawyer, not with fanfare, but with a handwritten letter. In it, he described not just the traffic stop, but a pattern of behavior he'd witnessed. The officer making racist jokes in the locker room, targeting certain neighborhoods for random stops, even bragging once about teaching someone a lesson after a minor traffic violation. He didn't ask for protection. He didn't ask for praise. He just said, "I took an oath to serve the public, not protect liars." His letter couldn't be ignored. Internal Affairs launched a new investigation, and this time they couldn't bury it. The public was watching. The older brother used the momentum. He filed an emergency motion asking the court to fast-track the civil rights case, citing newly discovered evidence and ongoing risk of evidence destruction. The judge, clearly frustrated by the delays, granted it. Trial was set for 6 weeks out. Now the real work began. He spent days prepping his brother, not just on what to say, but how to say it. "They'll try to make you angry," he warned. "They'll twist your words. They'll act like you're the problem. Stay calm, speak clearly, and never ever apologize for being stopped." He also tracked down 2 other men who'd been victims of the same officer, men who'd been too scared to come forward before. One had been arrested on false drug charges 3 years earlier. The case was dropped when the lab report came back negative. The other had been tased during a parking dispute. Both agreed to testify once they saw the body cam footage and realized they weren't alone. Their stories filled in the gaps. Together, they painted a picture not of a bad day, but of a deliberate, repeated abuse of power. Still, the defense wasn't backing down. The union lawyer filed motions to block the other victims from testifying, calling their cases irrelevant and prejudicial. He also tried to subpoena the teachers' mental health records, a common tactic to imply instability. The older brother fought back hard, calling it a fishing expedition and a blatant violation of privacy. The judge agreed and denied the request. Every small victory felt like climbing a mountain. Every setback felt like sliding back down. One night after a long day of depositions, the older brother sat alone in his office, staring at the stack of files on his desk. He thought about how easy it would be to walk away, to let the system grind this down into nothing like it had done to so many others. But then he remembered his brother's face the night he got out of jail. Not angry, not broken, just quietly asking, why? That why was the reason he kept going. He wasn't just fighting for justice, he was fighting for an answer. As the trial date neared, the city's lawyers started making noise about a settlement. First, a lowball offer, $25,000 and a promise to review policies. Then $100,000, then $500,000. Each time, the older brother said no. "This isn't about money," he told his brother. "It's about making sure this never happens again." His brother agreed. "I don't want a check. I want them to admit it was wrong." But the city wouldn't admit anything. Not yet. So they prepared for trial. The older brother rehearsed his opening statement in front of a mirror. He practiced cross-examining the officer in his head, anticipating every lie, every deflection. He met with the rookie officer one last time, promising to protect his identity, to shield him from retaliation, to make sure his courage wasn't wasted. The night before jury selection, The two brothers sat on the teacher's porch watching the sunset. No words were needed. They both knew what was at stake. The next morning, they walked into the courthouse together, not as victim and lawyer, but as family. As two men who refused to let fear win. Inside, the courtroom was already filling. Reporters, community members, even a few uniformed officers sat in the gallery. The accused officer arrived with his lawyer, eyes straight ahead, jaw set. He didn't look at the teacher. He didn't have to. He knew who he was facing now, and for the first time, he looked unsure. The older brother took his seat at the plaintiff's table, opened his notebook, and wrote 2 words at the top of a fresh page. Tell the truth. Because that's all they'd ever wanted. And now, finally, the truth would have its day in court. The courtroom was quieter than it looked on TV. No dramatic gavel slams, no shouting matches, no sudden gasps from the jury. Just the hum of the air conditioner, the rustle of papers, and the low creak of wooden benches as people shifted in their seats. But the tension was thick, so thick you could feel it in your chest, like walking into a room where everyone's holding their breath. The older brother sat at the plaintiff's table, back straight, hands folded. His brother sat beside him, calm but alert, wearing the same navy blazer he wore on parent-teacher conference nights. Across the aisle, the officer sat with his union lawyer, both of them looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. The officer kept his eyes down, but every now and then, he'd glance over just for a second, like he was trying to figure out how this man, the one he'd shoved against a car roof just months ago, had ended up here, in a position to challenge him. Jury selection took 2 days. The defense tried to weed out anyone who'd ever had a bad experience with police. The older brother, in turn, gently probed for people who understood that a badge didn't make someone perfect, just human, like everyone else. In the end, they got a jury that looked like the city itself. A nurse, a mechanic, a retired teacher, a college student, a small business owner, and others from all walks of life. None of them knew the full story yet, but they were willing to listen. Opening statements came next. The defense lawyer went first. He spoke slowly, confidently, like he was explaining something obvious to a room full of children. This case, then, he said, is not about racism. It's not about corruption. It's about a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by people who want to tear down law enforcement. He called the body cam footage inconclusive, said the planted bag could have been there all along, and painted the teacher as nervous and evasive during the stop, even though the video clearly showed him doing exactly what he was told. Then it was the older brother's turn. He stood slowly, walked to the center of the courtroom, and faced the jury, not with anger but with quiet clarity. You've seen the video, he began. You saw a man pull over for a broken taillight. You saw him keep his hands on the wheel. You saw him speak calmly. And then you saw an officer shove him, cuff him, and pull a bag of drugs from his own pocket, right before claiming he found it in the car. He paused. Let it sink in. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a lie, and it's not the first time this officer has lied under the color of law. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He laid out the pattern, the 8 complaints, the hidden training report, the other men who'd been targeted the same way. He introduced the rookie officer's testimony, read aloud by a court clerk to protect his identity. He explained how the system had failed again and again to hold this officer accountable, until now. This case, he said, looking each juror in the eye, isn't just about one traffic stop. It's about whether someone with a badge can break the law and still call it justice. And I trust you to see the truth. The trial moved fast after that. The teacher took the stand first. He spoke plainly without drama. He described the heat of the day, the sound of the siren, the fear that tightened in his chest the moment the officer said, "You think I don't know what you're doing?" He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He just told what happened, step by step, word for word, exactly as it had been on the video. When the defense lawyer tried to suggest he'd resisted or acted suspicious, he simply said, "I did what I was taught to do to stay alive." The jury watched him closely. You could see them nodding just slightly as if recognizing something familiar in his story. Then came the other witnesses, the 2 men who'd been stopped years earlier. One broke down when he described being jailed for 3 days over a bag of herbs he didn't even know was in his car. The other spoke in a low, steady voice about how he'd never reported it because nobody listens to people like me. Their pain was real, raw, and impossible to ignore. But the real turning point came when the officer took the stand. He walked up like he owned the room, shoulders back, voice firm. He repeated the same story he'd told in his report, that he'd smelled marijuana, that the driver was fidgety, that the bag was right there in the glove compartment. He denied ever planting evidence, denied ever using racial slurs, denied even remembering the rookie officer. The older brother waited until the direct examination was over. Then he stood. "Officer," he began, "you've been on the force for 15 years. Is that correct?" "Yes. And in that time you've made hundreds of traffic stops. Correct?" "Probably more. So you're trained to observe details, to follow procedure, to document everything?" "Yes." "Then why," he asked, stepping closer, "does your report say the driver reached for the glove compartment aggressively, when the body cam shows him sitting perfectly still with both hands on the wheel?" The officer shifted. I must have misremembered." "Misremembered," the older brother repeated. "Interesting. Because you also wrote that you immediately noticed the smell of marijuana. But the lab report shows the bag contained less than a gram, sealed in plastic. Not enough to smell through a closed glove box, let alone through rolled-up windows. Would you agree?" "I don't know about that." "You don't know," the older brother said, voice calm. "But your training manual says officers must be able to justify every search. Isn't that right?" "Yes, but—" "And yet," he cut in gently, "you searched the car without consent, without probable cause, and without a warrant. Isn't that a violation of department policy and the Fourth Amendment?" The officer's face tightened. "I believed there was cause. Based on what?" The older brother pressed. "A smell you couldn't have detected? A movement that never happened? Or was it just because of who he was?" "I object," the defense lawyer shouted. "Sustained," the judge said. "Counsel, rephrase." The older brother nodded. "Let me ask this instead. Have you ever used the phrase 'your kind' during a traffic stop?" "No, never." "Never." At that moment, the older brother walked to the evidence table and picked up a small audio player. "Your Honor, I'd like to play a short clip from a sealed internal affairs interview conducted 2 years ago, approved for use by this court." The judge nodded. A scratchy voice filled the room, the officer's own voice, from an old investigation. "Look, I know how your kind operate. You act innocent, but you're always hiding something." The courtroom went dead silent. The officer turned pale. That was taken out of context." "Out of context," the older brother said softly. "Or the truth?" He didn't need to say more. The rest of the cross-examination was like watching a dam crack. Every answer unraveled another lie. When asked about the training report he'd failed, he claimed he didn't recall. When shown the rookie officer's sworn statement, he called it a setup, but the more he denied, the less believable he became. By the time he stepped down, even his own lawyer looked uneasy. Closing arguments came the next day. The defense tried to frame it as one officer having a bad day, urging the jury not to punish the entire police force over a mistake. But the older brother didn't talk about the police force. He talked about one man, one choice, one abuse of power. This officer didn't just break the law, he said. He broke trust. He used his badge not to protect but to control, not to serve but to silence. And for years the system let him, because the people he hurt didn't have a voice. He looked at his brother, then back at the jury. "But today you are that voice. You get to say, 'This ends here.'" The judge gave instructions. The jury filed out. They didn't take long. Less than 3 hours later, they returned. The verdict was read aloud in the hushed courtroom. Guilty, on all counts, false imprisonment, evidence tampering, and violation of civil rights under federal law. No one cheered. No one cried. But you could feel the weight lift, not just from the two brothers, but from everyone in the room who'd ever been told to stay quiet, to let it go, to be grateful it wasn't worse. The officer sat frozen, staring at the floor. His lawyer whispered something, but he didn't respond. For the first time, his badge didn't shield him. It just hung there, heavy and meaningless. Outside, reporters swarmed, but the older brother only said one thing into the cameras. The system worked today, but it shouldn't take a lawyer and a courtroom to get justice for doing nothing wrong. His brother didn't speak to the press at all. He just walked to his car, got in, and drove home. Windows down, radio low, just like that day months ago. Only this time, he wasn't afraid. Back inside the courthouse, the older brother packed his files slowly. A young public defender approached, eyes wide with respect.
"How did you do it?"
She asked. He smiled faintly. I just believed him, and that was the truth. He'd believed his brother when no one else would. He'd believed the rookie officer. He'd believed the other victims. He'd believed that facts, fairness, and persistence could still win, even in a system built to protect its own. As he stepped out into the late afternoon sun, he didn't feel triumphant. He felt tired, but also clear, because he knew this wasn't the end. It was just one battle in a much longer fight. But for today, for this one moment, justice had been served, and that was enough. The morning after the verdict, the city woke up to a different kind of silence. Not the quiet of fear or resignation, but the stillness that comes after a storm has passed. When the air feels cleaner, lighter, like something heavy has finally been lifted. News vans still lined the courthouse steps, but the shouting had stopped. People walked a little taller. Even the sky seemed brighter. For the teacher, it started with a cup of coffee and a text from a student. "Saw you on the news. Proud of you, sir." He read it 3 times before setting his phone down, his hands steady for the first time in months. He dressed carefully that morning. Not in his usual worn slacks and button-down, but in the suit he saved for graduation ceremonies. He wasn't going to court or a press conference. He was going back to school. When he walked through the front doors, the hallway fell quiet. Students turned. Teachers paused mid-sentence. Then, from somewhere in the back, someone started clapping. It spread slowly, not loud or showy, just steady, respectful. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just nodded, walked to his classroom, and opened his lesson plan like any other day. But everyone knew it wasn't just any day. It was the day he came back, not as a victim, but as proof that you could face injustice and still stand. Meanwhile, his older brother sat in his office, staring at an email from the city attorney. The subject line read, "Settlement proposal, urgent." They were offering $2.3 million to avoid a federal civil trial. It was more than he'd expected. More than most cases ever got. But what mattered wasn't the number. It was the attached list of reforms the city agreed to implement. Mandatory body cam activation during all stops. A civilian oversight board with real power. Anti-bias training co-developed with community leaders. And a public dashboard showing complaint data by officer and precinct. He forwarded the email to his brother with one line. "They're finally listening. The settlement was approved within weeks." The money wasn't just for pain and suffering, it was seed money for something bigger. Together, they decided to use half of it to create a legal defense fund for people who'd been wrongfully targeted by police but couldn't afford a lawyer. They called it the Clear Path Fund, not because the road to justice was easy, but because someone had to help clear the way. The officer was sentenced 2 months later. 5 years in federal prison, no probation, no early release. And because it was a civil rights conviction, he'd never wear a badge again. His pension was revoked. His union dropped him without a word. The same system that had protected him for years turned its back the moment he became a liability. There was no parade, no protest in his defense. Just a quiet exit from a life built on power he never earned. But the real change happened in the places no camera could capture. At the police academy, new recruits now watched the unedited body cam footage as part of their ethics training. Not to scare them, but to show them what happens when authority is confused with entitlement. Veteran officers began speaking up in roll calls, calling out jokes that weren't funny, questioning stops that didn't make sense. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't overnight, but it was movement. The rookie officer who'd come forward, he stayed on the force. Not because it was easy. He faced cold shoulders, late-night hang-up calls, even a flat tire mysteriously slashed outside his apartment, but because he believed the job could be better. He joined the department's new community liaison team, working with neighborhood groups to rebuild trust. He never gave interviews, never sought praise, but every time a young person asked, "Can I really be a cop and still be honest?" he'd look them in the eye and say, "Yes, but you have to choose it every day." Back in the classroom, the teacher started a new after-school program. Not about law or protest, but about rights, plain and simple. He taught students how to record a traffic stop, how to ask for a supervisor, how to file a complaint that actually gets read. He brought in public defenders, retired judges, even a few reformed officers to talk honestly about the system, its flaws and its possibilities. The kids didn't yawn or scroll on their phones. They leaned in, because for the first time, someone was telling them the truth and giving them tools to protect themselves. His older brother watched from the back of the room one afternoon, arms crossed, quiet. He saw a girl raise her hand and ask, "What if they don't believe me?" The teacher didn't flinch. "Then you find someone who will," he said. "And if no one will, you become the someone." That night over dinner, the older brother finally asked the question he'd been holding on to. "Do you ever regret that day? The stop, I mean." His brother stirred his tea, thinking. "I regret that it happened," he said. "But I don't regret what came after. Because now, when my students look at me, they don't just see a teacher. They see proof that you can be treated wrong and still win." The older brother nodded. He'd spent so long fighting for justice that he'd almost forgotten what it was for. Not just punishment, but possibility. Not just to stop the harm, but to build something better in its place. A few months later, the city held a public forum on police reform. Hundreds showed up. Not just activists, but shop owners, parents, retirees, even a few off-duty officers in plain clothes. The teacher spoke for 10 minutes. No notes, no anger. Just facts, feelings, and a simple request. Don't let my story be the exception. Make it the standard. Afterward, a woman approached him, tears in her eyes. "My son was stopped last year," she whispered. "They scared him so bad he won't drive anymore. Thank you for giving us hope." He didn't know what to say, so he just held her hand for a moment and said, "He's not alone." As the seasons turned, life settled into a new rhythm. The headlines faded. The news vans disappeared. But the work continued, quietly, steadily, like roots growing under the surface. One Saturday morning, the older brother walked downtown to grab coffee. On his way back, he passed the courthouse, the same steps where his brother had been dragged in cuffs just a year before. Now a small group of young people stood there, holding signs that read, "Know your rights and justice starts with us." They were handing out pamphlets, talking to passers-by, answering questions with the kind of calm confidence that only comes from knowing your worth. He stopped and watched for a while. One of them, a college student with braids and a bright yellow backpack, spotted him and smiled. "You're the lawyer, right? From the case?" He nodded. "Thank you," she said simply. "Because of you, my little brother knows what to do if he gets pulled over." He didn't correct her. It wasn't just him. It was his brother. The rookie officer. The journalist. The jurors. The students. The woman who filed that first complaint years ago and was never believed. Justice wasn't a solo act. It was a chorus. He walked home that day with his coffee gone cold but his heart full. He thought about how easy it would have been to let it go, to accept the system as it was, to tell his brother to move on, to pretend that one bad cop didn't reflect the whole. But they hadn't. And because they didn't, something shifted. Not everything was fixed. Far from it. But the idea that a badge made someone untouchable, that lie had been exposed. And once a lie is seen for what it is, it can't hold power anymore. That evening, the two brothers sat on the porch again, just like before the trial. Fireflies blinked in the yard. A neighbor's dog barked in the distance. The world felt ordinary, and that was the victory. No grand speeches, no medals, just peace. The older brother looked at his sibling, tired, yes, but whole. "You did good," he said. His brother smiled. "We did good." And in that moment it was enough, because real change doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet return to normalcy after chaos. The first deep breath after holding it too long. The knowledge that you can walk down the street, drive your car, teach your class, and not wonder if today will be the day someone decides you don't belong. The badge was never a shield. It was a promise. And when that promise is broken, it's not up to the powerful to fix it. It's up to the people, the ones who show up, speak up, and refuse to look away, and they did, not for fame. Not for revenge, but because it was right. And in the end, that's all that ever matters.